Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, Whiskies. This is your host, Mr. Whiskey, and today I'd like to go over the 3 things that you can do to help you get more kills and go flawless in For Honor. This guide is going to be divided into 2 sections. The first half will cover the 3 things that you cannot control in the game no matter what you do, and the second half will cover 3 things that you can do to perform better. I'm only sticking to 3 controlled and uncontrolled things that you need to pay attention to in order to perform better because I want you to build a strong foundation. I pay attention to these 3 uncontrolled things because it helps build my situational awareness, and 3 controlled things because it helps me get more kills and stay alive longer. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. First up, we're going to talk about the 3 uncontrolled events that will happen every game that you need to pay attention to. The first involves time. In For Honor, it's impossible to be able to tell how much time you have in every single game. Why I'm mentioning time is because it directly impacts the amount of kills that you can get in a single game. For example, just for me, I feel like a good game that I can record and post is when I get around 2 kills per minute. So in 5 minutes, I would expect to get around 10 kills that game. Many factors go into time and the amount of kills that you can actually get. For example, whether or not you get your revenge, whether or not your teammates are good, whether or not your teammates are bad, whether or not your opponents are just steamrolling you or just capping points, whether or not you're capping points, whether or not you join late. All of these factors go into your kills and your time, or how much time you have during your game. So if you're going for kills, remember that you have a limited amount of time, so play as aggressively as you can throughout the match. And for those that are interested in going flawless, do your best to stay around your teammates and play passively. Next up is team. I understand that this point is going to be somewhat confusing, but I'll do my best to explain my thoughts. For those that are going for a high kill game, your teammates have to be worse than your opponents, and you have to play better than your opponents. Whenever I have great teammates or try and party up with a couple of friends, we just slaughter the enemy team. The games end up being around 5 to 6 minutes, and it's not really fun for anyone. Oftentimes when I play solo, I play with poor teammates and I go against bad opponents. This is great because that means that the game is usually going to be longer than what it usually would be if I had great teammates, and it also means I get tons of kills. Why I need to pay attention to this is because if your team is bad and all of a sudden there's a humongous brawl, you have to make sure that you know where your teammates are and whether or not they're still alive or not. When you don't pay attention to this, you're going to get ganked and you're not going to last long. And what's going to happen is you're going to be at the loading screen for a couple of seconds instead of actually going out and getting more kills. Now the last of the 3 that you need to pay attention to is the terrain or the map. As everyone knows, on certain maps there are ledges that you can throw your opponents off and your opponents can throw you off. Also, there are different variations of maps. There are large maps, there are small maps, there are maps in between, and you have to pay attention to this because you have to remember that traveling from point to point takes away time. Time is a huge factor in For Honor and it revolves around terrain. So terrain impacts the amount of time that it takes for you to get from point to point, your escape routes, the amount of kills that you can get in the game even. This impacts everything. So try and pay attention to these 3 uncontrolled events equally. To be honest, I couldn't really tell you which uncontrolled event is most important and which is least important, just try and remember all 3. So now that that's over, let's go ahead and get started in the second part of this guide. The first of the 3 things that you can control is your build. Please pay attention to this. I can't tell you how many times I steamrolled an opponent just because he had an awful build. A few weeks back, I discussed what I believe was the best overall build in For Honor. I'll leave a link to the video in the description below, and I suggest that you go and watch that video if you're interested in playing your best. I would certainly say that your build is the most important of the 3 controlled events that you have to pay attention to. If your revenge gain is too low, your defense is too high, or if you increased any unnecessary boosts to your build, you're at a disadvantage. And I love to play against these players. When I don't have to worry about playing against a revenge build or an attack build, I play more aggressively. And when I play more aggressively, I get more kills. It really is that easy, so do your team and yourself a favor and pay attention to your build. The second of the 3 controlled events that you have to pay attention to is flow. Essentially, you have to understand where your team is, where your opponents are, and where you are on the map. I'll give you an example. If your entire enemy team flows to A and your entire team flows to C, either take C or B. Don't try and go to A and be a hero because you're going to get destroyed. The only time that you should contest a flag is when you know that you can take down your opponents or if you're losing. Because I have a revenge build and use bleed and berserker as my feats, I can do this without too much worry. So going against 2, 3, even 4 people sometimes isn't really that big of a deal. And when you cap your opponent's flag, your team typically migrates to B and caps that flag, so usually you have a triple cap and you can get tons of points. But when you do this, you have to remember, what would your opponents do? If it were me, I would try and go to the closest flag, which would be where my opponent just beat me, and try and capture that. And usually in For Honor, a team flows together or moves together towards a certain flag. So if you feel like you're going to be overwhelmed, go ahead and leave the flag. There is no harm, no foul. But if you think they can go ahead and contest that flag and keep those points, go ahead and stay. And if you can get your team to flow to you by spamming the help button, then do it. You're going for the win, and so are your teammates. So sometimes you gotta bite the bullet, call your teammates over, and try and hold that flag. And if you see your opponents flow to a different flag, try and migrate or flow towards that flag. This all revolves around situational awareness and the last of our 3 controlled events, which is target prioritization. This is a skill that's going to take a long time to master, but when you get it down, it's really going to help you out. I've used this skill in every single game I've ever played, and it's always helped me stay alive. In addition, it also helps me get more kills, but I'll go over that later. When going against more than one player, you have to ensure that you're not surrounded. The best thing you can do is maneuver your opponent so they're either in front of you or to the left or right of you. If they're in front of you, you just have to block from one direction. And if they're to the left or right of you, just block in that direction and you'll get your revenge mode in no time. The only time that I can recommend where it's okay to be surrounded by opponents is if you're the Berserker. Again, I just ask that you watch my guide, but essentially the Berserker has Bounty Hunter, Revenge Attack, Lead, and the Berserker feat. All of these feats are very specific to anti-gank situations. And this also sets aside the fact that I use a revenge build, which is always another thing that helps during anti-gank situations. So if you're not a Berserker, I recommend keeping everyone in front of you or to the left or right of you if you're getting ganked. And as a quick bonus tip, I would recommend that you do something that I call tagging. It's the easiest tip that I can give you, but it'll get you tons of kills during a game. If you're on a flag and there is more than one opponent, do your best to attack or tag every single opponent on that flag. If you tag those enemies and your team comes over and kills those opponents, it still counts as a kill for you. So instead of only coming out with 1 kill on the flag, you can come out with 4. And the more kills you have, the quicker you'll get your feats. So that concludes the second part of my guide. Before you go, I ask that you comment down below on what I can do to make this guide or any other guide better. And until next time, take care, Whiskies.